Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam George. I'm a development lead at Microsoft. I work on the tablet PC. Today is very much the fulfillment of a dream of mine. So I've worked on tablet PC for roughly 5 years, and tablet PC has always been a great client technology, client in the operating system, but we haven't ever had a really good ink on the web story. Before I joined tablet, I had a stint in web development where I worked at Hotmail, and so I very much have a web background, and ink on the web has always been something near and dear to my heart, something that I've worked hard for over the last few years to get this done with another team of very talented people, and I'm very proud to be able to present what I'm going to be showing you today. So this is what we're going to cover. There's really two things that I want you to take away from this talk. I want you to know how to design ink into your experiences, and also the key concepts when you're dealing with ink in code that you'll need to go right back when you're developing those ink experiences and be productive immediately. And at the end, we'll take questions, and if you don't feel comfortable asking questions at the mic, you can come and grab me afterwards, and I'll also be over at the sandbox afterwards. So let's jump into a few samples, a few demos that show the value of ink over photos and video. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my tablet PC. So there's a lot of photo sites on the web. A lot of them are, static. Post a list of pictures. You might even be able to add some tags or some metadata to it and express yourself. And if you think about photos, photos are very much about self-expression. You're sharing your memories with your friends, families, and often strangers. A lot of the times when you want to add your own personal touch, you're really limited to text right now, like for tags or metadata. So we thought we'd design an experience that felt a little more natural. And so this experience is designed to be like as if you were holding a stack of photographs in your hand and you're just flipping through them. So when I click this arrow here at the bottom, the slides just fade, or the slides just animate to the front and the back as if I were just flipping through the photos myself. Then I can also do a screen show with Silverlight. Silverlight has full screen support, so this is actually a website that can take over and go full screen, which is pretty amazing. I mean, it's a nice increment over what you see today on photo sharing sites. And what I'd like to show you is that in addition to having a better experience like this, you can also make this experience even more personal with your own handwriting. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select this down here. And I've got a little palette of pen colors. What I'm going to do is write my cat's name here, Felix. And so I can actually add ink right on top of the photograph in a non-destructive way. So now, when I toggle through the photographs, you notice that ink sticks with the document, ink sticks with the image, because it's actually now part of the scene. So we have native integration of ink in Silverlight. I'm going to be showing you how to actually write the code that does this. The other thing is that now, when I go to a slideshow, you start playing the photograph, and then the ink fades in to give the user the understanding that this isn't part of the slide. It's not burned on the image. It's actually just an annotation on top of it. So you see, here's the Toll River. The ink fades in. It's kind of a nice effect. And just like tags, I can use these to search. So what I've been doing as I've been inking here is I've been talking to the tablet PC handwriting recognizers to recognize ink. So now, if I go down to a little search box that we built in, I've actually annotated a few lakes in my photo stack here. And when I hit search, I can actually go right to the slide that has the word lake on them. And if you notice, I haven't refreshed the page. And if I type Felix, my cat's name, then it'll actually go back to that page, or back to that photograph as well, which is pretty amazing. You can start clapping now for one. So what we're doing here is we're using ASP.NET's AJAX support, and every time I collect a pen stroke, I'm packaging up the ink as a XAML representation and sending it to the server, and then the server is performing recognition and then returning the results, and we just store that locally in the browser. And I'll show you how to do all of this as we go. Oops. Actually, I have one more demo that I want to show you. So there's a lot of sites as well that support posting videos today. Posting videos is very similar to posting photographs. It's another form of self-expression. As I said, there's a lot of sites that are doing this. I hear some of them are getting popular or might actually catch on. And while video adds an extra dimension of time where you get to see the stream of pictures moving through time, wouldn't it be nice if I could add my own handwriting and if my handwriting could participate in that extra dimension of time? So I'm going to go ahead and start recording and hit play. And I'll just add some ink here. There's Flipper swimming through the ocean. I'll erase that. I recognize this. This is the North Shore in Hawaii. And I'll just draw an arrow down here. Now if I pause this and then pop back on my timeline, you notice that the ink disappeared. And that's because as the ink is being collected, we're actually storing where in the video stream it's been collected. And now when I go back and play, I can actually play my handwriting back at the same speed that I collected it at, synchronized to the video stream. And you notice when I drew that arrow, I drew it kind of slow. You'll see here it just kind of draws down. So there's one more demo that I want to show you. And in addition to recognizing handwriting, we can also recognize shapes. So I wanted to give you a sense of how fast recognition happens. Recognition actually happens quite fast for small sets of ink. And so, as I mentioned, we can recognize shapes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw some shapes. And as soon as the pen comes up, as soon as I'm done with the shape, I'm going to invoke an ASP.NET AJAX call and perform handwriting recognition on server, and then get the shape recognition back to the client and insert a shape into this Silverlight application. So here's a triangle. And just like that, as soon as I pen up, it's recognized as a shape. And it can recognize all sorts of shapes and just keep animating these. Kind of addictive. So, why ink? As you saw, it adds very much a differentiating and personal touch to your experiences. If there are any of you that came here expecting that this was a tablet-only phenomenon, it's not. For the few users in the world that are still using a mouse, it works with that too. It also obviously works with the stylus. And the best part is I'm going to be showing you going forward is that it's really easy to add. I'm going to be showing you the key concepts in code, and then I'm also going to point you at my sandbox where I've written a lot of this JavaScript that does the heavy lifting for you. All right, so let's talk about some design guidelines before we get into coding. So one of the most important things is that when a user inks, they need a large space to do it, a large uncluttered space that's for nothing else but ink. You should avoid as much as possible having an enable ink button that takes some surface and all of a sudden ink enables it and then disables it. You want to have ink just be a natural part of the experience. So if I switch back, let me just bring this back up. If I switch back to PhotoStack, you can see that the whole top of the application is all about inking. It really doesn't do anything else. And at the bottom, we've got all of our commands. The other thing to point out is that when you're inking over photos and video, it can be hard to see the ink. Like if you just use black ink, for example, it can be very hard. It can disappear into the content. So one of the things that we've done in our Silverlight implementation of ink is we've added an outline color, and I'll show you how to use that in a minute. And the outline color just adds just that, a little faint outline to the stroke, and it really makes it pop. So if I switch back to PhotoStack here, you can see that the ink that I've got there actually has a little faint black outline to it. Something like that really makes it stand out and not blend in. So the two basic inking controls that you should allow users to do are to ink and erase. As you start annotating your photos or video, there's nothing more frustrating than having to just refresh the page to get rid of it. So to provide an explicit command for erasing. If you're on a tablet PC, you can just flip the pen over on the back and use the eraser, and that'll work. And then there's a couple extra additional controls you should think of as well. And that's one, changing the ink color, and also changing the height and width of the tip of the pen. And that'll determine how fat the stroke will be. So you can, hopping back to PhotoStack, you can see here that we didn't add a height and width, but we did add a little palette of colors that you can pick from to change the color of your ink. And if I pick this one, I get that color ink. So that's really it. The design principles for ink are very, very straightforward. Just want to keep that open inking surface and a separate commanding area. So let's jump into some code. We're going to be going over how to ink, how to erase, and then I'll be showing you how to persist ink, as well as how to play it back dynamically like you saw on the video. So before we get started with coding, some ground rules. The element that you'll be working with in Silverlight is called the ink presenter. Now we also have ink integration in Windows Presentation Foundation, and since Silverlight is a sister, we actually just mirrored a lot of the same concepts that we did in WPF. So WPF actually has an ink presenter element, and we also have an ink presenter element in Silverlight. Now this is based on the canvas element, and the canvas element, as you know, is just for absolute positioning. So internally in Silverlight, our ink presenter actually just inherits right from canvas. And what's nice about that is that you can use, anywhere we're using a canvas, you can actually just copy and replace an ink presenter, and it works exactly the same. You position all your children using top and left. So in addition to hosting children that are absolutely positioned, the ink presenter also adds a layer, an annotation layer, where you can present ink on top of your children. Now the entry point into that is our strokes property on the ink presenter. And the strokes property is of type stroke collection. Let's talk about that, our object model, just a little bit. So it's very, very simple. Anyone here that's familiar with our WPF object model, this is very much a bare bones object model relative to that, but we've taken just the most powerful and important concepts and distilled that into Silverlight. So you have a stroke collection, and a stroke collection is comprised of one or more or zero or more strokes. And each stroke is really only defined by two properties, drawing attributes and stylus points. So drawing attributes define how the ink looks, and stylus points define where the ink is. It just defines the spine of the ink. Each stylus point collection has zero or more stylus points. And the stylus point is just a fancy point. It has an X and a Y, of course, like point. Excuse me. And it also has a pressure factor. Just grab some water. And you can see over on the right-hand side, that's the actual XAML representation of an ink presenter with a single stroke that's blue that has a single point in it. You can actually pass that to the Silverlight hosting object. It has a method called create from XAML. You can actually pass that and get a real instance of an ink presenter that already has that stroke in it. So we recommend that you use the stroke collection XAML as your persistence format. So a little bit more about these objects before we start coding. Stroke collection is a Silverlight collection, so it has all of the collection methods. It also adds a few extra ones for us. It has a hit test method, and that allows you to pass in a path so that you can know whether that path intersects any of the strokes, and that's important for erasing. And we'll show you that in code. As well as get bounds to return the actual bounding rectangle of any of the ink factored into the drawing attributes as well. And again, a stroke is just very simple. It's stylus points and drawing attributes. And drawing attributes only have four properties of interest. There's the height and width of the tip of the pen, as well as the color, which is the fill color, and the outline color, which is the outside. All right, so let's get to some code. So collecting ink. I'm going to show you all this slowly, but I'll go over this first. The main strategy is for collecting ink is to listen to mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up. Each one of those events has a mouse event arg, and that event arg that gets passed in has a method on it called getStylusPoints. Now you might be wondering why mouse event args have a method called getStylusPoints. We just did that to sort of unify the two input streams between a mouse and the stylus. Let me explain what I mean by that. So as I move the stylus is sampled at a much higher frequency than the mouse is. Mice are sampled roughly around 33 times a second, whereas styluses are sampled at around 133 times a second, which means for every mouse event arg, you're going to get more stylus moves than you are mouse moves. But we don't actually raise more mouse moves. We just package them all up in each mouse event. So when you get a mouse event, you can call getStylusPoints, and it'll return to you all of the stylus points that have happened, including the current mouse point, since the previous mouse event. Once we get those stylus points, all we're going to do is add those stylus point collection to the current stroke that we're building up. And the good news, again, with all of this is that I have a simple JavaScript file that does all this for you. Again, from WPF, there's a WPF element called the ink canvas, which is our full editing element. And I've actually written an ink canvas JavaScript file that does most of the ink canvas editing for you that uses a Silverlight ink presenter. So let's hop over to some code. All right, so the first thing, we're going to start with an empty project, and I'll show you what it looks like. Yep. Oh, thanks. We're going to start with an empty project, and all it is it's a photograph of Seattle. You see Mount Rainier in the background there. This is just a simple application. Let me show you what the XAML looks like for that. So there's a parent canvas. There's also a canvas that I'm using for the border. And then there's an image element. And that's really all there is to it. And then I'm listening to the loaded event. And then in the loaded event, all I'm doing is getting a reference to the Silverlight hosting object. So let's add some ink now. First thing that I'm going to want to do is add an ink presenter. And I'll give it a name. Okay. And then I'm going to wrap that ink presenter around the image. And I don't have to give it a size. It'll take the size of its child. And then I need to listen to three events. I need to listen to mouse move, mouse down, and mouse up. So okay, there's mouse down. Mouse move. Okay, so I've defined my mouse event handlers in XAML. Now I'm going to switch over and add those in JavaScript. And each mouse event handler is called with the sender, the element that the mouse went down on, as well as the mouse event args. So now I have mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up. Now, mouse move is fired even when the pin of the mouse is, when the pin's in air or when the mouse isn't pressed. So I need to know when the mouse has gone down. So I'll create a variable for that. And what I'm going to do is on down, set it to true. The other thing I want to do is that when the pin goes down or the mouse goes down, I want to take capture. And all capture does is, even if the input device moves outside of the the input stream keeps getting fed to the element. And that's important because ink a lot of times you need to keep inking even if you accidentally ink outside the element. So to do that, I'm just going to call sender capture mouse. Okay, and then in mouse up, I'll set is down to false and release capture. All right. Now, so I have sort of the basics. Now I'm going to need to build up a stroke. And I also need to find the ink presenter to add that stroke to. So go ahead and create a reference to my ink presenter, as well as a stroke. And I can find a reference to the ink presenter by calling the Silverlight Object's find name method. And I named it ink presenter 1. Okay. Now in mouse down, I'm going to create a new stroke. And to do that is very easy. I can actually just pass the XAML representation of a stroke to the create from XAML method. So stroke. So I'll call create from XAML. Pass in a stroke. And just like that, I have a stroke. So now let's grab the stylus points. And to do that, I just call args.getStylusPoints. And this is very similar to the getPosition element, which returns the mouse point. You have to pass it an element that you want it relative to. And in this case, it's just the ink presenter that's getting called. So I'll get the stylus points. It is. Thank you, Rick. And then I'll append those stylus points using the add stylus points method. Okay, the magic of copy and paste. And one last thing I need to do in mouse down is add that stroke to the ink presenter stroke collection. All right. Now in mouse down, again, in mouse move gets raised every time the pen or the mouse is moving, whether it's pressed or not. And I only want to build up my stroke when the mouse is pressed or the stylus is down. So I'll just check if is down. And all I'm doing there, again, is grabbing the stylus points and appending. And then in up, I'll go ahead and set my stroke to null and release capture. So again, in mouse down, I set is down to true. I get the stylus points, create a stroke, append the stylus points, add the stroke to the ink presenter, and then in mouse move, just keep appending the stylus points. And now if I hit F5, and so this is how you can tell it's real code. There it is. Yeah. That's why they made me a dev lead. So, and just with that, I get ink. So that's all it really takes to add ink. So again, ink isn't really interesting if you can't erase it. So let's go and add erasing. And again, typically, most people don't have a stylus, and so you'll need an explicit command to turn it into erasing mode. In this case, I'm just going to see whether the stylus is inverted or not. And I'll show you how to do that. So now in down, what I'm going to check is if the stylus is flipped over. And to do that, all I have to do is call args.getStylusInfo. And this just returns a little class that'll tell you whether the stylus is inverted. And if it's inverted, I'm going to erase. Actually, I'll just move this up here because I'm going to need these stylus points in either way. And if it's not, then I'm going to ink. Now, each time I get a stylus point collection, I'm going to be hit testing. But there's a special case that you have to account for, and that's where two different stylus points span a stroke. And so what you always need to be doing is taking the last stylus point from the previous collection of them and prepending it to the current stylus points so that it always crosses any intersecting strokes. And again, this is really just so that you understand how this works. I have a script that does all this for you. So I'm going to keep a reference to the last stylus point. So what I'll do in mouse down here is just initialize my reference to the last stylus point by calling getItem to get the last item in the stylus point collection. Now in mouse move, if my stylus isn't inverted, I'm going to keep inking. But if it is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepend that last stylus point that I already captured in the last mouse move event or the first stylus down or mouse down event. I'm going to prepend it to stylus points by calling insert at the beginning. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit test. And to do that, I'll just call ink presenters strokes hit test method. And pass in those stylus points. And then I'll just loop across those. And if there's none in there, this loop will just terminate. And then for each one of these, I'll just remove it. Okay. And then in mouse up, I'll go ahead and set my last stylus point to null. Okay. And now you see, if I turn the pen over, put it down, as soon as the pen touches that stroke, it gets erased. So that's how you ink and erase. So recap of erasing ink, listening to mouse down, mouse move, mouse up again, getting the stylus points and calling hit test, and then removing any hit strokes. So those are the basics. Again, those are the two explicit modes that you should always add to an inking experience. But now let's go beyond the basics and show you how to also do persistence and playing back live strokes. All right, so for saving and loading ink, again, as I mentioned before, we recommend that you use the XAML representation. You can actually, we have the ink canvas script that I wrote will actually save the stroke collection as stroke collection XAML for you. And it also has a method to load that from XAML. You can actually pass this XAML to the create from XAML method, and it'll reconstitute a stroke collection for you. So let's hop back over to our demo. Now, we're going to start using my ink canvas code, and I'm going to nuke these methods, these handlers, because I don't need them anymore. And I also don't need these mouse event handlers anymore either. All I really need is this ink canvas script, and it just takes an ink presenter and the Silverlight hosting object so that it can create strokes. And what I'm going to do is create my ink canvas reference. and then initialize that by passing in the ink presenter. Okay, now with those 2 lines of code, I'm back to my inking and erasing. Now if you notice, the ink is black. And when you get down, as I mentioned before, when you get down over the city here, it gets harder and harder to see. So let's make that a little nicer. I'll just use the JavaScript with operator and get the ink canvas's default drawing attributes. And this really just gets me a reference. This gets me a reference to the ink canvas's an instance of its default or its drawing attributes. And it's used as the prototype to create new drawing attributes each time a stroke is added. So what I'm going to do is set color to white, and then outline color to gray. Now there was a project at Microsoft for a while called Microsoft Max, and they did a bunch of ink over photographs user research. And what they found was that white ink with a light gray outline is one that users tended to prefer the most. So go ahead and save that. And now when I ink, you see it's just a nice little subtle effect. I'll go ahead and erase that. All right, so let's add persistence. So in addition to the ink canvas taking an ink presenter and Silverlight, it can also take a reference to a function to call anytime the stroke collection is changed. So I'll just pass that in here and create a little function. And that just calls you with the add in and remove strokes. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simulate. Now I mentioned before that in PhotoStack, in the photo experience that we built, each time the pen went up, we would serialize all the strokes to XAML and then send that off to the server. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to simulate doing that. All I'll do is create a XAML variable, and I'll call this ink canvas save strokes to XAML. I'll go ahead and alert that so you can see it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the stroke collection. Okay. So now when I ink a stroke, oh, here we go again. I haven't been writing script in a while. 23. All right. Anybody see it? It's another plural. All right. There we go. So now when I on pen up, you see this is the XAML representation of that stroke that I just collected. And then as soon as I clear this, it's going to clear the stroke collection. Let's simulate a round trip. So you can imagine that now this is just XML, so I can put it in a web request and send it off to my server. Now imagine I got that same XAML back and I wanted to reconstitute the strokes. I can just call ink canvas load strokes, plural, from XAML. And I'll pass in the XAML. And now when I ink, there's the ink, it gets cleared, and then before you even noticed it, it was added back. So that's a very simple way to do persistence. A lot of people, when we first show them ink on the web and ink in Silverlight, like, how do you do persistence? And it's really no harder than this. So playing back a stroke. Now you saw over the video that I was actually playing back a stroke. I want to show you how to do this as well. The strategy for doing it is actually very simple. You just create a new stroke, and then with a single stylus point in it, and then add that to the ink presenter. And then on a timer, you just add back a quantity of stylus points on each tick. And again, I have some script that does this for you, but I'm actually going to show you the code here to do that. So let's switch back over. And you can play back ink over anything. Like in the demos, I was showing you playing ink over video, but you could play back the ink over the photographs as well. Okay. So what I'm going to do, actually I still need my strokes changed. So what I'm going to do is each time the stroke collection is added to, I'm going to clear the stroke collection and just play back the first stroke that was added. I'll show you how to do that. So I'll grab a reference to that. Get strokes plural. So I'll grab the first one. And I'm going to need a few extra variables up here. Actually, I don't need is down anymore. So I'm going to need to keep track of the stroke that I'm building up. The stylus points that I'm using to feed that new stroke, as well as the index in the stylus point collection where I'm at it right now. All right. So I have this stroke. Let's go ahead and clear the ink canvas. And then I'm going to initialize my reference to the stylus points. And set my stylus points index to 1. I'll show you why in a sec. And then I'm going to create a new stroke to play back. And again, to do that, I just use the Silverlight content create from XAML. Very handy method. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to set the drawing attributes to be the same between the two strokes, since I'm adding a brand new one. Move that over here so you can see it. And I'll go ahead and grab my stroke here. All right. Now that stroke that I've just created has no stylus points in it. So I'll go ahead and add stylus points to it, or a single stylus point, just by calling add. Okay, now that's the reason why I set my stylus points index to 1, because I've already added the stylus point at index 0. And then the last thing that I need to do is add this to the ink presenter, because we just cleared the strokes. And then I need to start a timer. So I'll just call the browser's window.setTimeout. And let's create a function to call. I'll call it playback stroke. Now, 50 milliseconds. Why did I pick that? So as I mentioned, the stylus is sampled at roughly 133 times a second. If you were to take 100 milliseconds, that would mean you need to play back roughly 13 stylus points. So I found that doing it every 50 seconds and playing back an average of 7 or so really gives a nice feel to how it is to play back with the stylus. You could also track whether or not it was collected with the mouse and change this frequency so it would play back more realistically with the mouse. All right, so we're calling playback stroke. The other thing we need to know is, are we at the end of the stylus point collection? So I'll create a reference, or a variable called addEnd, and initialize it to false. And then an index not to move at or beyond as I'm playing back the stylus points now. And I'll initialize that to stylus points index and add 7. Now I'll check to see whether I just went off the end of the collection. And if I am, then I'm at the end. And I'll truncate my end index to stylus points.count. Now I'm not going to walk off the end of the array because I'll never loop to at index. All right, and now all I need to do is loop while stylus points index is less than end index. All right, and then all I'm going to do is stroke for playback, append to the stylus points. Actually, let me do this on a separate line so you can see the code. By calling getItem. And I'll just go ahead and add that stylus point. And then the last thing that I need to do is, if I'm not at the end of my stroke, then I need to continue the timer. Let's go ahead and copy this guy. All right. So I'm sure I have a bug in here somewhere. So we'll find it in a second. Yeah, there we go. Silverlight obj. There we go. So as soon as the stroke pops up, or as soon as the pen's done collecting the stroke, I just clear the ink canvas and play back the stroke. Now you notice if I ink very slow and then go quicker, that the ink will actually play back at that same speed. And that's because even when the stylus is moving very slow, the ink is still sampling, or the stylus is still sampling at a high frequency. All right, so again, playing back ink is as simple as creating a stroke and just on a timer adding to the stylus points. Recognizing ink. Now, how was I recognizing ink when I was doing that in the PhotoStack example? Tablet PC has a bunch of recognizers that are normally only installed on the operating system, but they're also available as in the Tablet PC 2005 recognition pack, and this just happens to install on Windows Server 2006 in x86. And so what I'm doing on my server, actually this is a Vista machine, but normally in other demos that I've done, on a server, Windows Server 2006, I can actually install these three things: the Tablet PC 17 SDK, the 2005 Recognizer Pack, and the Ink Analysis Supplemental, and actually pass and use that to perform recognition. I have a sample ASMX file, an ASP.NET web service, that I'll post to a link that I'll show you in a second. And that's already built to take a stroke collection XAML, a string of stroke collection XAML, and returns a recognized handwriting. Now, at the bottom you see here that it returns the recognized handwriting as well as an alternate. The reason why it returns an alternate is because handwriting recognition is not a perfect technology. It's getting very good, but it's not perfect. My cat's name, for example, Felix, oftentimes that'll only show up in the second alternate, or in the first alternate, as opposed to the first recognition result. So, and again, this is just, I'm providing this as a MIX web service. It's just plain text. So you can modify it and actually return as many alternates as you want. But I recommend, usually the correct term will be found at least in the first or second alternate. So let me just pop back over and show you. Let's just erase almost all of Felix's name except the X. And let's pop back over. So this is the MIX session, the PhotoStack session that I showed you. And what I'm doing, let me just show you the page. This is a page, and I'm using the ASP.NET Ajax script manager. And what I've done is I've enabled page methods, which lets me call static methods in the code behind for this page that are marked with web method. So if I look at the code behind for this page, I've got a web method called getRecognitionResult, marked with the web method attribute. And this allows me from script to actually just call it like this by calling a page methods.getRecognitionResult. And so what happens is that in this application, anytime I collect a stroke, I just package up the stroke collection XAML and call this internal update results for slide method, and that calls this web service. So I'll go ahead and set a breakpoint here in my code behind on this web method. I'm going to go ahead and attach to IIS. And I'm going to debug managed code. And now, when I finish Felix's name, you see just like that, I've got my string annotation that's being passed, or my stroke collection XAML. And I'll open that up for you in the XML visualizer. You can see this is the stroke collection and the drawing attributes with the color, as well as all the stylus points. And when I step through this, I'll step into this get recognition result. And all it's going to do really is unpack all of the stroke collection XML in a system.xml XML document, and then use our ink analyzer. And it's going to pass all of the strokes that it pulls out of the XML to our ink analyzer. Here it calls this add stroke method. And then if I run that down to here, after it's done adding all of those strokes, then I'll perform analysis. And then I loop through the analysis tree to find all of the ink words. And here's where you can also find drawings and shapes and things like that. And then I'll get the recognized text. You can see here, it actually got it on the first one. I know you can't see that, but it says Felix. And then I'll add an alternate. And then we're back to the page. And then now I can search. Now if I were to advance this, then here I can search for Felix again. And that's just because I've taken those reco results, sent them back to the client, stored them in a special way so that I can search for them later. Okay, so the 2005 Recognizer Pack can be licensed for commercial use by contacting this email address here, mtpisv@microsoft.com, if you're interested in using this for commercial sites. Right now you can use it for development purposes. You're free to install this and try it out on your own machine. And I will take questions. This is the URL where I'll be posting the Ink Canvas JavaScript, as well as the JavaScript that does ink over video, and as well as the recognition web service. So this URL is mixer1042.mixsandbox.com. So I'll take any questions you have. And if you don't want to get up to the mic, feel free to come and grab me afterwards. Anyone want to stand up? All right. Thank you very much for coming.